Of the ancient religion of pre-Christian Britain, there are few written records, but it is contrary to all experience that a cult should die out and leave no trace immediately on the introduction of a new religion. The so-called conversion of Britain meant the conversion of the rulers only. The mass of the people continued to follow their ancient customs and beliefs with a veneer of Christian rites. The centuries brought a deepening of Christianity which, introduced from above, gradually penetrated downwards through one class after another. During this process, the laws against the practice of certain heathen rites became more strict as Christianity grew in power. The church tried her strength against witches in high places and was victorious, and in the 15th century open war was declared against the last remains of heathenism in the famous bull of Innocent the Eighth. This heathenism was practiced only in certain places and among certain classes of the community. In other places, the ancient ritual was either adopted into or tolerated by the church, and the maypole dances and other rustic festivities remained as survivals of the rites of the early cult. Whether the religion which survived as the witch cult was the same as the religion of the Druids, or whether it belonged to a still earlier stratum, is not clear, though the descriptions of classical authors are rather too vague and scanty to settle such a point. Sufficient remains to show that a fertility cult did once exist in these islands, akin to similar cults in the ancient world. Such rites would not be suppressed by the tribes who entered Great Britain after the withdrawal of the Romans. A continuance of the cult may therefore be expected among the people whom the Christian missionaries laboured to convert. As the early historical records of these islands were made by Christian ecclesiastics, allowance must be made for the religious bias of the writers, which caused them to make Christianity appear as the only religion existing at that time. But though the historical records are silent on the subject, the laws and enactments of the different communities, whether lay or ecclesiastical, retain very definite evidence of the continuance of the ancient cults. An influx of heathenism occurred on two later occasions. In the 9th century, there was an invasion by the heathen Danes under Guthrum, and in the 11th century, the heathen king Knut led his hordes to victory. As in the case of the Saxon kings of the 7th century, Guthrum and Knut were converted, and the tribes followed their leader's example, professed Christianity, and were baptized. But it cannot be imagined that these wholesale conversions were more than nominal in most cases. Though the king's religion was outwardly the tribe's religion, if, as happened among the East Saxons, the king forsook his old gods, returned to them again, and finally forsook them altogether, the tribe followed his lead, and in public at least worshipped Christ, Odin, or any other deity whom the king favoured for the moment. But there can be hardly any doubt that in private the mass of the people adhered to the old religion to which they were accustomed. This tribal conversion is clearly marked when a heathen king marries a Christian queen, or vice versa. And it must also be noted that a king never changed his religion without careful consultation with his chief men. An example of the two religions existing side by side is found in the account of Redwald, king of the East Saxons, who in the same temple had an altar to sacrifice to Christ and another small one to offer victims to devils. The continuity of the ancient religion is proved by the references to it in the classical authors, the ecclesiastical laws, and other legal and historical records. It will be seen by the foregoing that so far from the bull of Pope Innocent VIII being the beginning of the outbreak of witchcraft, as so many modern writers consider, it is only one of many ordinances against the practices of an earlier cult. It takes no account of the effect of these practices on the morals of the people who believed in them, but lays stress only on their power over fertility, the fertility of human beings, animals, and crops. In short, it is exactly the pronouncement which one would expect from a Christian against a heathen form of religion in which the worship of a god of fertility was the central idea. It shows, therefore, that the witches were considered to deal with fertility only. Looked upon in this light of a fertility cult, the ritual of the witches becomes comprehensible. Originally for the promotion of fertility, it became gradually degraded into a method for blasting fertility, and thus the witches, who had been once the means of bringing prosperity to the people and the land by driving out all evil influences, in process of time were looked upon as being themselves the evil influences and were held in horror accordingly. The actual feelings of the witches toward their religion have been recorded in very few cases, but they can be inferred from the few records which remain. Madame de Bourguignon's Girls at Lille in 1661 said, "Had not the least design of changing to quit these abominable pleasures, as one of them of 22 years old one day told me, 'No,' said she, 'I will not be other than I am. I find too much content in my condition.'" Though the English and Scotch witches' opinions are not reported, it is clear from the evidence that they were the same as those of the Basses Pyrenees, for not only did they join of their own free will, but in many cases there seems to have been no need of persuasion. In a great number of trials, when the witches acknowledged that they had been asked to become members of the society, there follows an expression of this sort: "Ye freely and willingly accepted and granted thereto," and that they held to their God as firmly as those de l'Ancre put to death is equally evident in view of the North Buick witches, of Rebecca West and Rose Hallibread, who died very stubborn and refractory without any remorse or seeming terror of conscience for their abominable witchcraft.